Daf Shabbos, Daf Chavches through Lamed Daled. Before we begin today, I want to thank my wife. Besides for being the inspiration for this series of Halachos of the Daf, she allowed, even encouraged me today to spend hours preparing and delivering this share several hours before B'dikas Chametz. On Daf Chavches, the Gemara says, Tani Rav Yosef, Lo Hochshru L'Melech HaShamayim. For Melech HaShamayim, for a mitzvah, certain mitzvah, the only thing that's kosher is Ar Behemat Tahara L'Vad, only the hide of kosher animals. The Gemara says, L'mai Halachos, what was he referring to? If he's referring to tefillin, the cloth of tefillin, the Gemara says, you don't need Rav Yosef for that. That's Behed Yaksibuhu. There's an explicit pasuk, L'man Tiyeh Taras Hashem B'ficha. The Torah of Hashem should be B'ficha. The Gemara dashens B'ficha meaning edible, Menamutter B'ficha has to be on something kosher. That's how we paskin. We paskin that the cloth of tefillin should be Me'ar Behema B'chayav Of HaTaharim. It should be from the skin, the hide of kosher animals, whether behema, domestic animal, chaya, wild animal, oaf, bird, but a kosher one. It doesn't have to actually be kosher, it doesn't have to have shchita. Even a nevela and treifa is kosher, but not from behema, v'chayav, oaf, tmeim, because of the pasuk of l'man tiyeh taras Hashem b'ficha. Bir Halacha brings, the ideal is oaf actually, oaf, the bird, kosher bird. After that comes chaya, wild animal. After that comes behema. I don't think the practice is actually to use oaf today, but Bir Halacha brings this from the Achronim that the ideal is to have oaf. He also brings an interesting point from the Pri Megadim. This is not limited to tefillin. L'mantiyat Taras Hashem has to be on something kosher, on mutter b'ficha. This applies to Svarim, even not Tanakh, even things like Gemara and Poskim. If they have Hashem's name, the Shemos HaMiyuchadim, the special names of Hashem, then the Shemos She'enim Nimchakim, the ones that can't be erased, Aleph, Daled, Nun, Yud, the other ones that can't be erased, you cannot write on Ar Behemat Tmeh. If it's only a remez, if you just have a symbol for Hashem's name, that's okay. And Gemara and Poskim too, he says, but just a simon, it's okay. But if they have Hashem's name written out, that's a problem. Today we don't write on hide at all, so it's less of an issue. We print on paper, but in theory, at least, that's the halacha. So the Gemara tries to figure out what Rav Yosef meant. What is his din on Melech HaShamayim? The Gemara says maybe it means la'oran, not for the cloth on which the tefillin is written. Maybe it means for the animal hide that forms the covering of the tefillin, the bias, the part that surrounds the parashiyos. The Gemara says that's also halachos mishinai. You don't need Rav Yosef for that. Abaye said the shin of the tefillin is halachos mishinai. The shin that's in relief on the bias is halachos mishinai. Rashi explains tefillin have the three letters of the Shem Hashem, shin, daled, and yud. The daled is in the knot on the back of the shalosh. The yud is a knot of the strap on the tefillin shel yad, and the shin is in relief on the bias. We have shins on both sides of the bias. We have a three-letter shin. Shulchan Aruch says we have one on the right, one on the left. On the right of the person putting them on, it's a three-headed shin, a regular shin. On the left is an unusual four-headed shin. But since that's a Shem Hashem, Rashi says it's subject to the same rule of mutter b'ficha. So of course you can't have behema tmeah. This shin, what kind of shin is it? Mishnah Berurah brings, the Achronim seem to say that meikra din, all you need is a general form of a shin. It doesn't have to be a formally correct shin in Ksav Ashuris, but he says that the minhag of Sofrim, at least in some places, is to mahader, to do it in an ideal way, which is to write a proper shin in Ksav Ashuris. How do you make the shin? The Shulchan Aruch says the shin is made from folds, from wrinkles in the hide itself. It's not stuck on, it's built into the hide of the bias itself. Now, ideally, this would be done by manually picking and pulling at the hide itself, pulling it into the shape of a shin. That can be difficult. Post can discuss whether you can use a mold, whether you can simply cause the skin to be, the hide of the bias to be pliable and malleable and stick it into a mold and just push it into the mold of a shin. So the Mishnah Berurah brings that the Tazim and Magen Avraham indicate El Chatchila, you should avoid that. On the other hand, the Ramami Pano, Nachman Zar Yofano says, it's better, it's more mahudr, you can get a better shin like that. Mishnah Berurah says, that's the minhag, Pashut Kayom, the minhag today is to use a mold to form the shin. I saw Rabbi Yirmiyahu Kaganov says that we actually do the best of both worlds. We try to be machmer to do the shin manually and to get a beautiful shin, so we do both. We first form the basic shin, which is a kosher, technically correct shin, the basic shin without all the frills and hidurim. We form manually without the mold. Then, once it's kosher, then we use the mold to make it into a shin mahudr, a nicer shin with all the hidurim. So because of the fact that it has a Shem Hashem, it's subject to the rule of mutter b'ficha. So the Ar of the bias has to be Ar Behemat, again, Ar Behemat Chayav of Taharim. You can have Nevela and Treifa, but they have to be from kosher species. The Ar of the bias refers to the part of the hide around the parashiyos itself, the the square or the rectangle, as we'll discuss soon, that holds the Parshias itself. But it also applies, and Mishnah Berurah says, to the Arav, the Titura, and the Mavarta, the pieces of hide at the base of the tefillin that rest against the arm and the head itself, because they're connected to the bias that holds the Parshias. They all have the same din, that they all have to have mutter b'ficha. Applies to both Shal Rosh and Shal Yad. Both of them have this rule of mutter b'ficha. So the Gemara tries yet another approach to what was Rav Yosef talking about when he said Melech HaShamayim. Maybe it means l'karchem b'saron and torfim b'gidin. There are halachas that we wrap the parshios in seyar, in the hair of an animal, and when we sew the tefillin with gidin, with sinews of an animal. That's also halachos misinai. It brings a brayso that says that's halachos misinai, that they have to be done. And also the brayso adds the tefillin have to be merubos, they have to be square. That is part of the halachos misinai. So square means the length and width of the bias has to be square, and the diagonal has to be 1.4. Chazal always say that the diagonal of a square with a side of 1 unit is equal to 1 2/5, 1.4. That's not an exact specification for the square root of 2 for the diagonal, but it's an approximation that halacha often uses. The height of the tefillin have no share, so the tefillin have to be square in their length and width, but the height can be more or less. And also the size of the tefillin are not fixed. How big the square is. It has to be square, but it can be a large square or a small square. That's all fine. That satisfies the halachos misinai of square. How square does it have to be? So the Mishnah Berurah says to make it perfectly square, mathematically, absolutely square is kemat min nimna. It's virtually impossible, but you have to do whatever you can. Kol ma d'afshar, whatever's possible, that's what you have to do. That's the chiyuv. The later post can discuss exactly how square does that mean. Rav Moshe Feinstein argues at length that you don't need a microscope, he says. Anyway, 1.4, he says, is not exactly accurate. The square root of 2 is a little more than that. So Chazal are telling you that approximately square is enough. So the Rav Moshe argues, Ef shel tzamtzim. Chazal tell us it's impossible to be perfectly, inhumanly precise. And the halacha assumes that in general, Rav Moshe says this is an example of a general halachic principle also. Halacha doesn't require the use of technology to fulfill its obligations. Halachic requirements are to do the best you can with unaided native human abilities, and that's fine. So for all these reasons, Rav Moshe says you don't need a microscope, you don't need advanced technological tools to make your tefillin square. He brings a tradition that the Brisker Rav did use a microscope, recommended the use of a microscope. Difficult to understand, he says. Maybe the Brisker Rav was afraid that the batamacher, the people who made the tefillin, wouldn't even be doing as good a job as they could without tools, and therefore he used the microscope to make sure that it was reasonably square. But Mikra Din, Rav Moshe is emphatic that you don't need to use a microscope to make your tefillin square. The Gemara says Ritzuos. Maybe we're telling you that the Ritzuos of the tefillin have to come. Maybe that's what Rav Yosef was telling us about Melech HaShamayim. The Ritzuos have to be from a kosher animal. The Gemara says no. Ritzuos Shcharit Halachos misinai. But the Ritzuos need to be black. That's also Halachos misinai. So finally, the Gemara concludes, yes, it's Halachos misinai that they have to be black, but not kosher. Kosher, that was Rav Yosef's chiddush about Melech HaShamayim, and that's the conclusion of the Gemara. Ritzuos have to be black. So we know that tefillin, the leather of the bottom is black as well. That's our minhag certainly, but the ikar black, the black that the Gemara talks about is the black of the Ritzuos itself. That's the primary thing that has to be black. How black does it have to be? The Mishnah Berurah brings it has to be shcharos ka'orev, black like a raven. Exactly how black that is, I'm not sure, but that's how black it has to be. If they become unblack, if the black wears off, the dye wears off, you have to reblack it. That's why people have those little fill-in paints and fill-in markers. You have to be reblacked. Especially where you tighten the knots, the black often rubs off, he says. You have to be very careful about that, to reblack it if necessary. However, the Shulchan Aruch says it only has to be black b'bachutz, only the exterior part of the Ritzua, the interior part of the strap does not have to be black. Mishnah Berurah says there is a Rambam who says even the interior part does. The minhag is not like that, we don't paskin like that, only the outside has to be black. Today, most tefillin are only the outside. There are some tefillin they've started to sell that have black through and through. It's a hiddur, according to the Rambam, the Arzarua they bring. There are some poskim that say it's a good idea. Moreover, more recently there's been a great controversy about how they dye the tefillin, even though much of the production, manufacture of tefillin is ancient, but some of the techniques change and evolve. They use a method of dyeing tefillin ritzuos today, different from the old methods, that apparently, according to its detractors, is really a superficial covering of blackness. The ritzua itself is not being dyed. It's more like a plasticky film that adheres to the surface of it. Some say that that's not called the ritzua's dyed, that's called black on the surface, like a black sticker that you can peel off. Some say the plastic might be a chatzitza between the black and the tefillin. Some don't like this new method, and dyeing it through and through is possibly one method to avoid this. Then you're sure that you're using a dye which permeates the ritzua itself, rather than a dye which just sticks to the surface and might be a problem according to some contemporary poskim. The Gemara goes on. The Gemara says that away from tefillin, back to Shabbos candles. The Gemara says hamadlik, someone who lights a candle, tzarich sheyadlik barov hayotze. He has to light the wick so that most of the wick that emerges from the oil is burning. Mishnah Berurah explains that it has to be like the menorah. In the menorah and the Mishkan and the Mikdash, they lit like that. So that's what you have to do. This halacha is brought in the context of Hanukkah as well. The Mishnah Berurah brings here that it applies both, not just to oil lamps, it applies to wax candles and neiros of animal fat as well. This is something that not everyone does. You have a long wick, especially if the wick is soaked with oil. It take a while to burn that far down. Most people just light a little bit until they see the fire and move on to the next one. Seems that that's incorrect. I don't know if you literally have to wait till most of it is burning or just wait till a substantial amount of it is burning. The language is rove. It seems that the halacha is a person really has to remain with the taper he's using to light the menorah, to light the Shabbos candles at the wick until most of the wick that emerges from the wax or from the oil is burning. On Daf Shabbos, Mishnah says you're not allowed to put a tube of eggshell with oil, a reservoir of oil that will drip into that will add oil to the nair itself. And the reason you're not allowed to do that, the Gemara brings machlok, Mishnah brings machlokas about it, and Rashi explains based on the Gemara, the concern is that you may take some of the oil from that reservoir to use for some other purpose, and that would be mechabet, that would be extinguishing the nair. Extinguishing it can be a malacha deraisa. The Rosh says if you take oil out of that reservoir, it's a malacha deraisa. This comes up, we don't really do this with our Ner Shabbos that commonly, this comes up in a very modern application. This comes up in the question of using Shabbos clocks. Poskim of the 20th century had extensive debate over whether you're allowed to adjust a Shabbos clock on Shabbos, even if you assume you're allowed to set it before Shabbos. Are you allowed to adjust it to make it go on or off earlier on Shabbos? We're not talking about adjusting it so it'll flip off right now. Adjusting it, the light, if now it's 9 o'clock, the light is supposed to go off at 12, you're going to make it go off at 9:30 because you want to go to sleep. So are you allowed to do that? Some poskim said no, because it says here that taking oil out of the reservoir is mechabe. It's mechabe because the nair will go out earlier than it would have otherwise. So adjusting the timer so that it will turn off earlier is mechabe. Other poskim say it's not such a problem. Other poskim say that's only a grama. It's not really usher. The Gemara says shemi yistapek. The Gemara here and Beya says there is a problem of mechabe. So they say that mechabe is really only if you take oil out of a nair. Then they say the nature of oil lamps is if you remove oil, the fire itself is diminished. It has less intensity right now. I don't know how that works exactly, but that's apparently the way oil lamps work. If you remove oil from the nair itself, that will cause an immediate diminution of the fire itself. So it wouldn't seem to apply in the case of the reservoir. It's hard to imagine how taking the oil out of a separate reservoir will cause the nair below it to burn less intensely. That might be a question of muktzah. But in any event, other poskim are much more lenient with regard to timers because they argue that there's no isser of kiboy of causing at least not midaraisa, of causing a lamp to go out earlier than it would have otherwise. This is an extensively discussed topic, but one raya, at least one locus for the discussion, is from this Mishnah of removing oil from the reservoir. The Gemara talks about the shita of Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon says davar shem miskavrin is mutter. Something unintentional on Shabbos is mutter, even if you know it may happen. If you don't intend it and it's not a psik reisha, it will not definitely happen. Then it is mutter. That's how we paskin. The Gemara brings an opinion that Rabbi Shimon said it was only mutter. The example of Rabbi Shimon is dragging a bench, where the bench may or may not make a ditch, make a trench in the ground. So making a trench is a malacha, either charesh or bana. But if it's not definitely going to happen, Rabbi Shimon says it's mutter, davar shem miskavrin. There is an opinion of the Gemara it's only mutter if it's a large bench and it's not convenient to carry it without dragging it. So then Chazal allowed you to do this, but if it's a small bench, you can just pick up and carry, or without any ditch at all, you really should avoid it. You shouldn't rely on davar shem miskavrin. We don't paskin like that. The Gemara says to Yufta, we paskin ben gedolim, ben ketanim, it doesn't matter. If it's davar shem miskavrin, if it's not necessarily going to happen, it's not a psik reisha, it is mutter. Mishnah Berurah brings from the Magen Avraham, if it's a really heavy bench, it might be a psik reisha. If it's so heavy, it'll definitely cause a trench, then it's aser. But as long as it's not a psik reisha, as long as it's an ordinary davar shem miskavrin, it is mutter, even though there's another way to do it. This used to come up in yeshiva. They have the paper towel dispensers with folded paper towels. You pull out one, if it's packed tight, it might rip. So it might be a psik reisha. But assuming it's not a psik reisha, assuming you know it may happen, but it's not a psik reisha, then it's just davar shem miskavrin, so it's mutter. The fact that there's another solution, some people pull them out slowly and carefully, you're not mechayiv to do that. As long as it's not a psik reisha, As long as it's darashim miskaven, it is 100% mutter, and you're not obligated to look for other solutions to avoid the possibility. The Gemara talks about, the Mishnah actually begins on the end of Chavtes, the Gemara continues on to Daf Lamed, the Sugya, talks about putting out an air, extinguishing an air because you're concerned about enemies, bandits, or because of a sick person, you want him to sleep. The Mishnah says you're potter. The Gemara says, what kind of sick person are we talking about? If he's a cholash yesh bo sakana, if he's a person in mortal danger, not just potter. Potter means you're not allowed to do it, but you're not chayav for it. Mutter. It's mutter even l'chatchila. And that's, of course, how we paskin. You're allowed to extinguish a ner in order to allow a cholash yesh bo sakana, someone who's in mortal danger, to sleep. That's because nefesh, it's Daf Shabbos. Mishnah Berurah brings from the Rambam that that's assuming there's no other way to do it without chil Shabbos. If there is another way, if you can carry the person out to a different room, if you can carry the nair out to a different place, if you can cover the nair with a pot, Shabbos lamps, you can just turn it so it's shielded, it doesn't bring light into the room. You should do that rather than relying on chil Shabbos. But if you have to, then you do because it's pikuach nefesh. Similarly, if you have a non-Jew, the Mishnah Berurah says you should do that if there'll be no delay. Throughout Halachos Shabbos, when there are different positions in the poskim, sometimes we say you should not involve a non-Jew, even if you don't think there'll be delay, because there might be. We assume that Jews are more concerned and will show more alacrity to save the other Jew's life. But here the Mishnah Berurah says if you don't expect undue delay, just have the non-Jew do it because you don't want to be mechal Shabbos unless you absolutely have to. Cholash yesh bo sakana, the same thing applies to listim. If there are cases of bandits, you're afraid the bandits will come and kill you. You can extinguish the nair so they won't come, like the story of Rabbi Akiva we had a little while back. The story of Rabbi Akiva who said, Gamzu Latova, when he was traveling and his nair blew out, he said, Gamzu Latova, and sure enough, he was spared getting caught by bandits. The Mishnah Berurah brings from the Achronim, the same thing applies to suffix lakana, even if it's only a question of possible danger. Still we say, even suffix lakana is Docha Shabbos. Mishnah Berurah brings an interesting point. He says the language of the Gemara, the poskim is that if it's a cholash yesh bo sakana, you can extinguish the nair so we can sleep. It doesn't say if sleeping or not sleeping is a matter of life and death. It just says as long as the person in general is someone who is in mortal danger or a suffix of mortal danger, you can extinguish the candle. The implication is even if we don't have any direct reason to believe that sleeping or not sleeping will make a difference to his longevity, to his survival, the mere fact that he is dangerously ill is enough of a reason to extinguish the candle. Mishnah Berurah brings that there is an opinion that says no, that we have to actually have a diagnosis that sleep is critical for his survival. Mishnah Berurah says no. Mishnah Berurah says the Ikar is like the simple reading of the Gemara and the Shulchan Aruch. The mere fact that he's in danger, there's a presumption that sleep will be beneficial for him, sleep may prolong his life, at least chayisha, maybe even more than that. You don't have to get a diagnosis, you don't have to get a professional opinion that sleep is critical for his survival. The mere fact that he is dangerously ill, that's enough of a reason to extinguish the candle because he's a cholash yesh bo sakana. Even if he's a cholash she'ein bo sakana, the Mishnah Berurah says, if you do have a medical opinion that if he doesn't sleep, he will become dangerously ill, that's also mutter. If you have a specific diagnosis that he needs it, that's also mutter. But even without a diagnosis, the mere fact that he's dangerously ill, that allows us to make sure that he gets enough sleep. If he's the cholash she'ein bo sakana and there's no opinion that it's dangerous for him, then you cannot do kibu, you cannot extinguish the nair. Even though we do certain isurim d'Rabbanan for a cholash she'ein bo sakana, but not kibu. Kibu could be daraisa, according to some poskim. Kibu in this context is what we call malacha she'ein tzricha legufa. It's a malacha whose purpose is not for the same purpose as the Mishkan. It's not the primary purpose of kibu. It's because you want to make charcoal, you want to get the black stuff at the tip of the wick. The kibu here is for a secondary reason because you want to have dark so we can sleep. That's malacha she'ein tzricha legufa. A machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon in the Gemara. Machlokes Rishonim how we paskin. Certainly, if you say kibu malacha she'ein tzricha legufa is chayav, you certainly can't do it for a cholash she'ein bo sakana. Even according to those who say it's Drabanan, it's a more serious Drabanan because it's adjacent to a Daraisa, so they do not allow this for anything short of a Chola Sheyesh per Sakana, or at least a Chola that's a Suffix Sakana, or a Chola that may end up in Sakana. But if it's a Chola She'ein per Sakana, they didn't allow Daraisas, they didn't even allow Malacha She'ein Tzricha Legufa. The Gemara brings a story that Shlomo sent to the Beis Medrash. He had two questions. One of them was his father had passed away, and he was with the son. There was danger of the body decomposing. It was Bizayin HaMeis, it would be disrespectful for the deceased. What can he do on Shabbos to move the body? The body's muktzah. They gave him a solution. They said, use kikar v'tinok. Put a loaf of bread or a child, things which are not muktzah, on the body. Then you'll be moving it with a davar heter, with something which is not muktzah. So the exact rules of when we apply this heter, what kind of mace, is it only in the sun, not in the sun, there are complicated details. It's not the most practical question today. However, there is an interesting debate in the poskim as to whether as to whether the heter of kikar v'tinok, of using a davar heter to move muktzah, applies to any muktzah or just in the context of mace. Shulchan Aruch in Siman Sheni Aleph says the only heter is for mace, doesn't apply to other types of muktzah. However, in Siman Shin Ches, he says yesh matirim. Some allow this to move any type of muktzah, or at least the muktzah of klishim lach to leiser, something which has a prohibited purpose on Shabbos, which you're allowed to use l'tzarach gufo makomo, but not necham l'tzel, not to save it from being caught in the rain, being destroyed. But you can move it via a kikar v'tinok, via putting a davar heter on top of it. Mishnah Berurah says that is the opinion of the Rush, but many Rishonim disagree, like the other Shulchan Aruch said, and say the heter is exclusive to mace. Many Achronim pass in the way, so you should not be lenient. But so he implies you should not be lenient. One exception, though, is that this whole discussion is when the davar heter, the non-muktzah item, has no connection, doesn't belong there, like you're putting a kikar v'tinok on a dead body or on top of a power drill, you put a loaf of bread. But if you have something that belongs there, for example, you have a grinder. The grinder is muktzah on Shabbos because you can't grind on Shabbos, but you have some garlic that was ground there still in the grinder, or you have a pot. A pot is muktzah because you can't cook on Shabbos, not a serving pot, but a cooking pot. You have some food left over, that's mutter. You can move the pot, agav the food, because the food belongs there. The food is in its natural environment. It allows you to move the pot. Daf Lamed Aleph, the Gemara brings 3 famous stories illustrating the difference in approach to Torah, to halacha, to life between Shammai and Hillel. 3 prospective gerim, non-Jews who wanted to convert, and they had unreasonable, improper requests that were not halachic and were not reasonable. One of them wanted to learn just Torah Shebachsav. He didn't accept Torah Shebal Peh. One of them wanted to learn the entire Torah standing on 1 foot. One of them wanted to learn Torah and become a Kohen Gadol and wear the begadim of the Kohen Gadol. Shammai was scornful and dismissive, and he chased them away. Hillel said, no problem. He accepted them, and he eventually, due to his masterful pedagogic skills, his kiruv skills, his outreach skills, he was able to educate them, and he brought them around to being proper gerim. So the Rishonim, Rashi already in his commentary, Tosfos in different places, Rishonim ask, there's a halacha that you don't accept gerim unless they're makabel the Torah. They have to makabel the whole Torah. If a prospective ger says, I think Judaism is great, I think Torah is great, I accept most of it, but I have a problem with this or that, with one particular mitzvah, you don't accept such a ger. So how could they accept a ger who said, I want to wear the begadim of a Kohen Gadol? How can they accept a ger who said, I don't accept Torah Shebal Peh? Sounds pretty basic. So Rashi has widely quoted comments. Rashi says, Samachal Chachmaso. Hillel relied on his skill, on his ability to guide people, to educate them, that he would bring them around to being a proper ger and accept the whole Torah. Even though it says davar echad, if he rejects one thing, you can't accept him. That's only when he doesn't accept Torah in principle. But here he says that he accepted Torah. He accepted Torah's Mipei Gvura. This particular thing, he didn't know, he didn't accept. That Shammai chased him away because Shammai held that was unacceptable. Hillel said that this guy was not kosher in Torah Shebal Peh. He just didn't believe that this particular thing was part of Torah, and therefore Hillel thought he could educate him. It's stirring words, but very hard to understand exactly what Rashi means. Most of those who reject Torah, it's because they don't believe it's from Hashem. Even there are those who believe there was some revelation maybe and don't believe our particular Torah, Orthodox halacha, is from Hashem. Is that really enough of a commitment to become a ger? Poskim struggle with this, but these are the comments of the Rishonim that you see from these stories, at least in some cases, that there is a heter to accept a ger, even if he's right now not ready to accept all of Torah. Hillel was willing to accept a ger who accepted Torah Shebachsav and not Torah Shebal Peh because he knew that eventually he could lead him toward the light, to lead him toward being a proper ger. Daf Lamed Beis, the Mishnah starts on the end of Lamed Aleph. It says that there are 3 averos for which women perish in childbirth: not being careful about nida, about challah, taking off challah when they bake, and hadlachas haner. The Gemara asks, why are these averos punishable by death? So the Gemara says that when it comes to ner, the Gemara says that the neshama of a person, his soul, is compared to a ner, a common motif in Jewish thought. Neshama shenasati b'chem kriya ner, your soul is called a ner. I warned you about ner, I warned you to be punctilious about the mitzvah of ner. If you fulfill the mitzvah of ner, great, and if not, I will take away your neshama, which is your ner. The Gemara doesn't clearly explain why women in particular. The obligation of ner Shabbos is equally on men and women, so why they're mandatory on both of them, so why women? The Rashi gives 2 reasons. One reason is it has to do with the sin of Eve, the sin of Chava, because of the sin which we're blaming on her, that she extinguished the ner of the world, and therefore she has a special mitzvah to kindle the ner. Also, a more prosaic, more mundane reason, tzarchei abayis tluyin ba, she is domestic, she does the housework. Today ner Shabbos is more of a ritual. Back then ner Shabbos was the light that you had to see by. Today, some posts can actually recommend that you include turning on the electric lights as part of Ner Shabbos, because Ner Shabbos isn't about some kind of ritual like Ner Chanukah, it's about having Ner to see by. So some posts can say the electric light is lit, it's still okay because it adds some cover to the house, but either way, the point is Ner is a domestic duty, so that's why the women does it. Rambam and Shulchan Aruch bring the latter reason of Rashi, hey Mitzuyas Batim, they're at home, they do the housework. Rambam in general explains things more rationalistically, it's no surprise that he goes with that reason. The Mishnah Brewer brings from the Arizal that it's good, even if the woman lights, which is certainly the common practice, even if the woman lights, the man should arrange the neiros, the man should set them up. This is a practice that many people do. That not everyone does it, but this is a practice that many people do, that the man sets up the Ner Shabbos even though the woman actually lights it. The Gemara goes on, the Gemara says, a person should not stand in a dangerous place, a person shouldn't put himself in a situation of danger, and he should, maybe he'll say, I have bitachon, Hashem will do a miracle for me. Maybe Hashem won't do a miracle for you. And even if he does, it will be debited from your zechuyos. Hashem has an accounting arrangement that if he gives you an extraordinary nace, you will lose some of the credit that you have for mitzvahs that you've done. This rule that a person should not stand in a place of danger is halachic, it's not just good advice, and it's theological too. It's invoked by two tshuvos in the 15th century. Both of them were writing about a very current topic. They were writing about epidemics. There were plagues that were sweeping through. The Maharil wrote about this in Europe, in Germany, the Rashbash, Rabbi Shlomo ben Shimon Duran in North Africa. The question was, is it theologically appropriate to flee the plague? If it's all determined by God, a person's fate is decreed on Rosh Hashanah, and Hashem decides what happens, so maybe you're flattering God by trying to flee the plague. They both rule absolutely not. The person should flee, the minhag was to flee. They quote Gedolei Torah who fled the plague. And in terms of theological justification, they bring a variety of Talmudic arguments as well as philosophical arguments in the case of the Rashbash. And one of them is from this Gemara. This Gemara says, Al Yamad Sakana, a person should not place himself in a place of danger. So they bring this as a proof that a person has an obligation to act b'derech hateva, to act according to the laws of nature. They didn't understand epidemiology the way we do. They didn't understand microbes and the vectors of transmission, but they knew empirically that geography played a role in the plague. If you were near the infected, you might get it. So they said you should leave. That's what the Rashbash, and the Maharil is actually brought by the Raman, Shulchan Aruch, and the laws of Sakana. And the Rashbash says this quite eloquently, repeatedly. Gedolei Chachamenu would flee the plague. What about Nigzar Rosh Hashanah? So they say, not everything is Nigzar. Certain people, Hashem guarantees life. Certain people, Hashem guarantees death. Certain people are just left to the laws of nature and left to their own endeavors. If they're successful in avoiding danger, they'll live, and if not, they lose. So for them, certainly they should avoid the plague, and that's why Gedolim did. Everyone should consider himself possibly in that category, and that's why you should leave the plague in fulfillment of this guidance of the Gemara, not to place yourself in a situation of danger. Daf Lamed Gimel is the story of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai hiding in the cave, Lag BaOmer. The Lag BaOmer sugya it's associated with Lag BaOmer, at least the Gemara itself doesn't mention that here. So the way the story goes was that there were three Tanaim, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, they were discussing the Roman civilization, the Roman civic works, the examples of the marketplaces, the bridges, the bathhouses. So they had three different opinions. Rabbi Yehuda said, it's so beautiful what they do, their civic accomplishments, their civil engineering is great. Rabbi Yossi had no comment, he remained silent, a prudent silence. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai said, he was fearless, he was outspoken, he said, no, everything they do is selfish, they're not some kind of humanitarians, everything they do is for their own selfish and even degraded reasons, he says. And he said they build the marketplaces to put zonos there, they build bathhouses to pamper themselves, they build bridges to collect tolls. Yehuda ben Gerim was a participant, he heard this conversation, he reported it, and eventually it made its way to the Malchus, the king heard about it, the Roman government heard about it, so they said, Rabbi Yehuda who praised us shall be elevated, shall be honored, rewarded. Rabbi Yossi who remained silent, he will be exiled. Rabbi Shimon who criticized us, he is sentenced to death. Rabbi Shimon has to run away, he hid in the cave, and so on. The end of the story is, the last line of the story is, that when he said he re-encountered, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai re-encountered Rabbi Yehuda ben Gerim, who was responsible for all this trouble that he had. He said, what? This person is still around? He said, is he still around? A dying Yesh Lezeh Ba'olam, and he punished him, he killed him. Rabbi Yehuda ben Gerim died because of this. Rambam in Halachos Lashon Hara in Halachos Deos, the Rambam says that a person should not speak Lashon Hara. And moreover, the Rambam says, classic Lashon Hara, evil speech, slander, I say something which is objectively negative about you. I say someone is a fool, someone is ugly, someone has bad character. That's classic Lashon Hara. Rambam goes on and says, even things which are not bad, but they could lead to trouble for you, things which will cause you to get in trouble, cause you to get begufo, physical trouble, bemono, cause you to have financial trouble, even that, or cause you pain and suffering, even if it's not a pejorative statement, but if it's a statement that can result in negative consequences for the person I'm talking about, that's included in Lashon Hara. What is the Rambam's source for this? The Kesef Mishnah does not say, but the commentary on the Rambam, Adnei Yad HaChazaki, says, if you look in the Masoras HaShas, that's how I found it when I was looking for halachic aspects of this Gemara, the Masoras HaShas tells you, on this Gemara of Yehuda ben Gerim, look in the Rambam. The Rambam apparently understood the reason Yehuda ben Gerim was punished was because that was a form of Lashon Hara. He didn't say anything bad about Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, he just said, this is what Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai said about the Romans. It wasn't bad, but it got him in a great deal of trouble. So speaking in a way that gets people in trouble, that itself is something that you're punished for. That's the Rambam source. Another commentary on the Rambam, the Sefer Avodas HaMelech, he says that he himself, Rabbi Yehuda ben Gerim, was not a Rasha. He himself was a distinguished person. So he must have thought he wasn't doing anything wrong. He didn't mean for him to get in trouble. He was saying something which was well known. Gets into the discussion of ape klasa, things which were said in front of three people. He thought there was no real harm in reporting the conversation. He was still punished because things that have to do with the Malchus, things that have to do with the government are extremely sensitive. He should have been more careful. He should have realized once Rabbi Yossi was silent that these were dangerous waters he was getting into, or other reasons. But the point is that certainly someone should avoid doing something which he knows he should realize will get somebody in trouble. And even here he was punished because even though this was something that wasn't maybe so bad, still he should have realized that there was a potential danger in repeating this type of politically charged conversation. Daf Lamed Daled, the Mishnah says there are three things a person should say on Erev Shabbos. He should remind people about. He should say Isartem, ask a question, did you take off Maser? Eravtem, did you make an Eruv, either Eruv V'Tchumen or Eruv V'Chatzeres? Or Hadlikus Haner, that's understood as a commandment, as an imperative. Light candle, it's time to light Shabbos candle. You can't do these things on Shabbos, so you have to warn people before it's too late to do them. The Gemara says you should say them b'nei chusa, you should say them gently, you shouldn't say them aggressively and in a hostile way. Why? In order that they should accept them. The Gemara does not say because it's nice to be nice and shalom bayis and all that. Those are doubtless good things. The Gemara here is concerned about a more specific concern, not that it'll cause tension, but that they won't listen to you. They won't listen to you, they won't do it, they'll be afraid of you and they'll feed you non-kosher food and so on. But that's the concern. If you want to be listened to, sometimes you catch more flies with honey than vinegar, so therefore sometimes if you want to get people to listen to you, it's more effective. Maybe the point of the Gemara is that even aside from shalom bayis, you might think that the importance of getting this done is more important than shalom bayis. Even if that's true, the Gemara is saying it's still more effective to do it in a way that is gentle and not in a way that is aggressive. This exact list, the poskim add and subtract from it. The Rameir of Rottenburg, Maram of Rottenburg, he wouldn't say Yisartem, we don't take off Maser today, it's not in Chutz La'aretz anyway. Instead, he would say Efrashtem Chala. I don't know why Mishnah didn't say Chala, but he would say, do you take Chala off the dough? Also, Eraftim, he wouldn't say, did you make an Eruv, because he used to do the Eruv himself. There's no point in telling your household members, did you make an Eruv? You're the one making the Eruv, so go make the Eruv. Don't ask me about it, it's not my job. So he would do the Eruv. So the Shulchan Aruch, the way he brings the halacha is, you say, Isartem, Eravtem, Efrashtem Chala, and Adliku Asaner. Four things. Isartem, Beis Yosef lived in Eretz Yisrael, at least part of his life, so for him, Maser was a real thing, at least in Eretz Yisrael. But he brings all four things down, Isartem, Eravtem, Efrashtem Chala, and Ner. Where there's no Meiser, where there's no Meiser, you don't have to say Isartem because it's not relevant. Similarly, if you don't make Eruvin, Eruv Chatzera is not everyone makes, so people make it once a year or so on, like we do before Pesach, then you don't have to say it. If you don't make Eruv Tchumen, if you typically don't do it, you live in an urban setting where there's no need for an Eruv, even suburban setting, then again, it's not Exeris Akasiv, it's not a ritual. If you don't do these things, you don't have to say these things. If Rashtam Chala, people don't ask about this today, the Mishnah Berurah brings, he refers to the poskim about why not. The implication though is that people actually, the basic halacha is still in force. A person should say these things when it gets close to Shabbos. Again, sometimes saying these things is maybe more trouble than it's worth. It can cause, again, tension and stress. It can harry people. So I guess Chacham Eina Barosho, but these halachas apparently are still relevant. A person should issue the appropriate reminders before Shabbos. The Gemara goes on, the Mishnah goes on and says if it's a Safek Hashecha, Safek Eina Hashecha, it's already Ben Hashmashos, it's already possibly Shabbos, you can't take off Maser or Vadai, you can't do Tfilas Kalim. This, in the Talmudic times, that meant you don't do Kalim for Tumah. Today it means you don't do Tfilas Kalim for buying new utensils from non-Jews. You can't light candles. Even though a person wants to light candles, a woman might feel bad she hasn't lit candles. Once it's Ben Hashmashos, once it's Pashkia, as we're going to see soon, you can't light candles. Even for a mitzvah, because this is a question of a deraisa, the Mishnah Berurah explains that lighting after Ben Hashmashos could be a real deraisa, no heter whatsoever, to do it yourself. Al Ma'asrin said Mai, you can take certain drabanans they allowed, take Ma'asr of Mai, which is only rabbinic, Ma'arvin, Tom Nesachamin, you can do Hatmana. So Mishnah Berurah explains only these drabanans, other drabanans we do not allow Ben Hashmashos unless, as we saw earlier in the Masechta, unless it's a question of mitzvah. They allowed certain drabanans, more drabanans, Ben Hashmashos or Shas Chak, but in general we don't allow most drabanans, but there are certain exceptions. The Gemara on Amud Beis discusses what is Ben Hashmashos. The Gemara, it's an extremely complicated and difficult sugya. The Gemara brings numerous opinions. The opinion we paskin like is Ben Hashmashos is Safek min hayom min halayla, Yehuda Shita. Ben Hashmashos is a period that halachically might be considered night, might be considered day. We go l'chumra both ways. When is Ben Hashmashos? Yehuda Shita is Mishtishka Achama, from Shkia, that's the beginning of Ben Hashmashos. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, that's how we paskin later in Daf Lamed Vav, that's how we paskin, the Gemara says. How long is Ben Hashmashos? The Gemara brings shitas about that too. Rabbi Rabbi Yehuda says, Amar Shmuel, Shlosha Chelkei Mil, 3/4 of a mil. A mil is commonly assumed to be 18 minutes, so 3/4 of that, about 13.5 minutes. And the 3/4 of a mil, that's the maskana according to this opinion. There are other opinions, but we paskin like this, the Ben Hashmashos begins with Shkia and lasts 3/4 of a mil. There is, however, a major problem in that the sugya seems to contradict the sugya in Psachim that says that between Shkia and Tzeitz Chavim is 4 mil. Gemara always says Tzeitz Chavim is Laila. So is Ben Hashmashos 3/4 of a mil or 4 mil? So there are two major approaches. One approach is Rabbeinu Tam's approach, that there are two Shkias. Shkia as sunset is still considered, what we call Shkia today is still definitely day, Vadayom. And from there it's 4 mil, 72 minutes until Tzeitz Chavim. Ben Hashmashos only begins 3/4 of a mil before Tzeitz Chavim, so Ben Hashmashos begins 3¼ mil after Shkia. So for the first 54 minutes, for the first 50-something minutes or so, it's still after Shkia, it's Vadayom, and Ben Hashmashos is only the last 3/4 of a mil before Tzeitz Chavim, which is quite late, which would mean you can still do Malacha after Shkia for more than a half hour. The other opinion is the opinion of the Gaon of Vilna. Mishnah Berurah said it's also the opinion of many of the earlier Gaonim, which is that Ben Hashmashos begins from what we call Shkia, from when the sun sets, and it lasts 3/4 of a mil, even though he says clearly it takes longer than that for the stars to be visible. The Gemara was talking about Eretz Yisrael, but it's a little bit longer. It could be longer in northern latitudes in Europe. L'maisa, the minhag of most of the world, certainly the non-Hasidic world, is to consider it to be Ben Hashmashos, l'chumra certainly for Shabbos. As soon as Shkia, we don't light candles, we don't drive cars after the first Shkia, the Shkia of sunset. There are claims that the Hasidim, at least in Europe, used to have the custom of still doing malacha even after the first Shkia, like Rabbeinu Tam, the Shulchan Aruch passing like Rabbeinu Tam. But today the custom, I think, is virtually universal, and certainly for Shabbos, that we consider it at least a suffix Shabbos already from the beginning of Shkia, from the first Shkia. How long Ben Hashmashos lasts, whether we're making like the Gaon, or well, it could be a Kula or a Chumrah, whether we go like the Gaon, that Ben Hashmashos begins from the first Shkia and therefore ends relatively early, or like Rabbeinu Tam, that it goes much later and it doesn't end till 4 mil, till 72 minutes after Shkia. That's a major machlokas. That's why some people are stringent, particularly for Shabbos, not to consider Shabbos over until a full 72 minutes after Shkia. Many people are more lenient, either based on the Gaon or based on the idea that Rabbeinu Tam himself didn't really require 72 minutes. And this is a topic beyond the scope of our share today.